Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
The call for reparations for Black Americans is not just a demand for financial compensation. It is a moral reckoning, a historical accounting, and a necessary step toward justice. The United States, a nation that prides itself on liberty and justice for all, has long grappled with the legacy of slavery, segregation, systemic racism, and the enduring economic disparities these injustices have created. At the heart of the reparations debate is the figure of $350,000, a sum that represents the wealth gap created by centuries of exploitation and disenfranchisement. But this is more than a number. It is a testament to what Black Americans have endured and a symbol of what is owed to them. To understand why reparations are essential, one must first confront the weight of history. From the first African captives who set foot on American soil in 1619 to the abolition of slavery in 1865, Black people were subjected to unimaginable cruelty. Enslaved individuals were treated as property, stripped of their humanity, and forced to labor under inhumane conditions. The wealth generated by their toil became the foundation of America's economic prosperity. Cotton, tobacco, sugar, all cash crops that drove the U.S. economy, were cultivated through the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved Africans. Even after emancipation, the promise of freedom remained elusive. The Reconstruction era, a brief period of hope, was followed by the rise of Jim Crow laws that codified racial segregation and disenfranchisement. Black Americans were denied access to quality education, fair housing, and employment opportunities. Lynchings, racial violence, and terror tactics were used to suppress their progress. Generations of Black families were excluded from wealth-building opportunities like homeownership, a reality exacerbated by discriminatory practices such as redlining and predatory lending. Fast forward to the present, and the effects of this systemic oppression remain glaringly evident. Black Americans, on average, possess significantly less wealth than their white counterparts. Studies have shown that the median wealth of a Black family in the U.S. is a fraction of that of a white family. This wealth gap is not incidental. It is the cumulative result of centuries of policies and practices designed to marginalize Black people. Reparations are not a handout. They are a recognition of this systemic harm and an attempt to rectify it. The figure of $350,000 per Black American is grounded in the calculations of economists and historians who have analyzed the economic impact of slavery and racial discrimination. This amount seeks to address the intergenerational loss of wealth and opportunity that Black families have experienced. It accounts for unpaid labor, denied opportunities, and the psychological toll of enduring racism. While no sum of money can fully compensate for centuries of suffering, this figure represents a tangible step toward addressing the disparities that persist to this day. Critics of reparations often argue that the past is the past, and that today's generation should not be held accountable for the sins of their ancestors. But this perspective ignores the enduring impact of historical injustices on contemporary society. The wealth and privileges enjoyed by many white Americans today were built, in part, on the exploitation of Black labor. Conversely, the struggles faced by many Black Americans today are directly tied to the systemic barriers imposed by slavery and segregation. Reparations are not about assigning blame. They are about acknowledging harm and taking responsibility for rectifying it. The moral case for reparations is compelling. Throughout history, nations and institutions have made reparations for wrongs committed. Germany paid reparations to Holocaust survivors, and Japanese Americans in turn during World War II received compensation and an apology from the U.S. government. These acts of restitution acknowledge the harm done and affirm the humanity of those who suffered. Black Americans deserve the same recognition. Beyond the moral imperative, reparations offer an opportunity to address the deep economic inequities that continue to plague the U.S. Providing financial compensation to Black Americans would empower communities to invest in education, entrepreneurship, and homeownership. It would create opportunities for upward mobility and help bridge the racial wealth gap. Reparations are not just an act of justice. They are an investment in the future. The question of how to implement reparations is complex, but not insurmountable. Some proposals suggest direct payments to descendants of enslaved people, while others advocate for investments in community programs and infrastructure. Both approaches have merit and are not mutually exclusive. Direct payments would provide immediate relief and opportunities for wealth building, while community investments would address systemic issues and create lasting change. The key is to ensure that reparations are comprehensive and tailored to the needs of Black Americans. Critics often raise concerns about the cost of reparations, arguing that the U.S. cannot afford such an expense. Yet, the federal government has allocated trillions of dollars for initiatives ranging from military spending to pandemic relief. The question is not whether the U.S. can afford reparations, but whether it has the will to prioritize justice. The cost of inaction, continued racial disparities, social unrest, and the perpetuation of inequality is far greater than the cost of reparations. Reparations are not a panacea. They will not erase the pain of the past or eliminate all racial disparities. However, they represent a critical step toward healing and reconciliation. By acknowledging the harm done and taking tangible action to address it, the U.S. can begin to build a more equitable and inclusive society. Reparations are a statement that Black lives matter and that their contributions and sacrifices will no longer be overlooked or undervalued. The journey toward reparations will not be easy. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about America's history and its ongoing legacy of racism. It demands a willingness to listen to the voices of Black Americans and to center their experiences in the conversation. It calls for bold leadership and commitment to justice. But the rewards, a more just and united nation, are well worth the effort. As the call for reparations grows louder, it is imperative that we keep the focus on the individuals and communities who stand to benefit. Reparations are not just about money. They are about dignity, recognition, and opportunity. They are about affirming the humanity of Black Americans and addressing the injustices they have endured. They are about building a better future for all Americans. The figure of $350,000 per Black American is not just a number. It is a symbol of what is possible when we confront our history with honesty and courage. It is a reminder that justice delayed is justice denied, and that the time for action is now. Reparations are not a radical idea. They are a necessary step toward fulfilling the promise of America. The question is not whether we can afford to pay reparations, but whether we can afford not to. In the end, reparations are about more than economics. They are about justice. They are about acknowledging the truth of America's past and taking responsibility for its future. They are about creating a nation where liberty and justice are truly for all. The journey toward reparations will be long and challenging, but it is a journey we must take if we are to build a more just and equitable society. The time for reparations is now. The time for justice is now.